Well, welcome to our third Island Housing Crisis panel discussion. We have another wonderful set of panelists this evening, well-informed, knowledgeable, and they're going to teach us a whole lot tonight. We are going to answer the question about how the island is, the island housing crisis is impacting our elders and our youth and our tribal lands, and also what the CCMVHB could do to help with these issues. I'm Laurel Reddington with nonprofit listener-supported MVY Radio. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I would first like to introduce Polly Belen Wilson, who is going to be our Brazilian Portuguese interpreter tonight. So there's a globe at the bottom that you can press on if you would like to hear this in Brazilian Portuguese. So thank you so much, you beautiful Polly Belen Wilson thing.
Olá a todos, boa noite. Para quem está ouvindo em português, aí embaixo na caixinha do Zoom de vocês tem um globo. Escolha um português que eu vou para o outro lado para poder falar em português com vocês. So for whoever wants to listen to this in Portuguese, just go to the globe and click in Portuguese language. I'm gonna go to the next room.
Thank you so much, Polly. We have this thanks to the Community Ambassador Partnership. It's so wonderful that we can have Brazilian Portuguese interpretation. So I would also like to draw attention to my co-pilot here, Jess Faniff, who is going to be with us and keeping an eye on the chat. Jess, thank you. And she's going to be making sure that all of your questions are answered. And an hour goes fast, but we are going to answer every question we possibly can. All questions are welcome. I mean, we're here to get educated. We are here to get educated before we go in and vote. And just as a reminder, Wednesday is the 23rd of March, and it's the last day for us to get registered to vote. And you would be surprised at how many people are not registered to vote yet. And there needs to be, we're here to inspire getting involved and active in our community and making choices about our future that are going to affect all of us. And your vote really does matter. So think about that. And we're going to talk more about that as we go on. But every question you could possibly have from any angle or perspective, please bring it tonight. And we will either answer it tonight or we will answer it within a reasonable amount of time offline, getting you to the right person who can get you the right answer. That's a promise. So all of our previous panel discussions, if you want to catch up on them, they're on our community outreach page at mvyradio.org/community. They're all there, or they're on YouTube. You can search it that way too. So I would love to begin with Julie Fay, who, as we know, is really committed to this community. She's the former CEO of Martha's Vineyard Community Services, and she's the co-chair of the coalition to create the Martha's Vineyard Housing Bank. So year-round resident, Julie, you've seen this community from every possible angle. What is so important about right now? What is this housing bank, and why is time of the essence here?
Well, thank you, Laurel, and thank you to MVY Radio for hosting this series to really illuminate the problem for Islanders and maybe compel people to get out and vote at town meeting and the ballot votes next month. It really is a very crucial time right now as we try to figure out solutions to this very significant housing crisis we have on the island. I'd like to start with just going over a couple of very compelling statistics that I'm sure several people have heard these statistics, but you combine these kinds of facts along with the anecdotes we all have of friends and family members who have been put in a situation where they have to decide between moving off island because of the housing crisis or not, and what that means to themselves and their family, their career, and what their absence means to the island. But let me just start with a couple of facts about the island's housing situation right now. The median home price in 2021 on the Vineyard was $1.26 million. $1.26 million, you know, that's a very significant number. Last week, there were only 4 homes for sale on the Vineyard. They were under $900,000 purchase price, just 4 homes. 51% of Martha's Vineyard housing is year-round, so a little over half of the housing is year-round. And it used to be 38, it was pretty steady at 38%, but over previous years, but that reflects the number of seasonal residents moving here year-round because of the epidemic. And that's increased which has really decreased, really taken a dent in our year-round rentals available for Islanders who work here full-time. According to the Dukes County Regional Housing Authority, there are over 1,000 residents waiting for housing. Of that, 700 island families are waiting for affordable rentals, and more than 400 island residents are on waiting lists to purchase affordable homes. So right there, you have over 1,000 people out of a population base of 20,000. That's a very significant number. 21% of island residents pay more than half of their income for housing. And more than 18%, close to 20% of island housing inventory was short-term rentals in 2020. And this is a number, as we all know, that is currently rising. So 20%, almost 20% of our housing stock, our housing inventory has come off the inventory list for year-round rentals and is really short-term rentals, week to 2 weeks. And the median cost of one of those weeks is $3,000. So that is the kind of information, plus our own personal experience with the housing crisis, that caused a group of folks to come together in November of 2021 to create this kind of grassroots effort that we call the Coalition to Create the Martha's Vineyard Housing Bank. The goal of the coalition is to preserve the island community by establishing a regional housing bank that provides significant permanent funding to advance year-round housing. The funding source for the bank would be a 2% transfer fee on real estate transactions. At a minimum, the first $1 million of every transaction would be exempt. And the fee levied on the amounts over $1 million would bring in approximately $12 million a year to the housing bank. And the housing bank would in turn use that money for development projects to repurpose existing properties and to really increase the inventory for year-round rentals and affordable home ownership opportunities. So how are we going to do this? We have a two-level approach that we have been really very hard at work over the last 16 months with. At the local level, we've been meeting for the past year with town boards and committees across all 6 towns to craft warrant articles that would direct the towns to ask the legislature for approval to create an island-wide housing bank funded by a transfer fee on real estate sales. Approval of that article would be up for a vote twice in each town next month at all 6 town meetings, and also followed up by 6 ballot votes at the town election. At the statewide level, we are participating with a very large statewide effort, including Nantucket, Concord, Brookline, Somerville, Arlington, Chatham, and Boston, to support proposed statewide enabling legislation that would allow real estate transfer fees to be established in Massachusetts to fund affordable community housing. All 6 island select boards have submitted support letters for those bills to the legislature. If one of those bills passes, it would pave the way for a local housing bank legislation to be accepted at the state level. So again, we have a 2-pronged process. We have a lot of work that we've been doing at the local level to get the towns to agree, the select boards to agree to a warrant article in each town at town meeting, which has happened. And then at statewide level, we've been working very hard with a statewide effort to get the enabling legislation passed. So that's where we are.
Thank you so much, Julie. Now, Ariel is the co-chair, is the other part of the co-chair of the Coalition to Create a Martha's Vineyard Housing Bank. And she's also the administrator for the Affordable Housing Committee and Trust. She is fiery committed to making things happen in this community. And she's going to, so Ariel, you have a personal story here, and you, so you're on the front lines, and that's why you're such a good tenant advocate as well, because you know what this feels like. Can you share a little bit about this personal story of yours and things through your perspective?
Yes, thank you so much, Laurel. Thanks for allowing me to participate and tell my story. I'm grateful to be here, and yes, part of the reason that I am so passionate is because I have had real life experience. I arrived with my family in 2010 after deciding to open up a graphic design company. that would allow me to stay home with my boys. We found that there was not much available on the market year round at the time. There were some affordable, winter rentals, and, some things in the paper and some things on Craigslist. But you still had to hunt, but you could find something. We happened to find a rental and then a year-round rental, but we had 2 months in between where we didn't have anywhere to stay, and we ended up staying in a room with a friend, all 4 of us, and her 2 children and our dogs and everything, all together in this one little house, just so that we could, get to our next destination.
A lot of generosity in that right there, generosity of spirit.
Thank goodness for the island, right? I mean, people here can be quite amazing, thank goodness. But we then, went to another year-round rental. I think we went through probably 3 before we settled in one that was comfortable or more stable, I should say. And then I ended up separating from my partner. And that can be difficult for any family. However, on the island, it's a whole other situation because you can be stuck with, in a situation that is not ideal or safe for your children or yourself. And you never know when something can come up. Luckily, my situation was quite amicable, and it was okay for me to stay in the home for another year after I had separated, actually divorced my husband at the time. And then I was on the list for an affordable home that popped up in Scotts Grove. There are 9 apartments in that complex in West Tisbury, and I got onto the list, and I wasn't picked first. I was actually picked 12th and ended up being drawn. And I cannot tell you the relief that that brought me, and stability for my children. And it's something that everyone deserves, to have that peace of mind.
Do you feel, Arielle, I'm not to interrupt, but that felt like luck. It felt like luck.
Yeah.
That's how you're getting housing.
It is literally the luck of the draw. I mean, you have to make yourself available for that, but in the end, that's what it is. And I really want that for everyone, particularly the children on the island, because it is so very difficult for them, but it is for everyone. When the parents are stressed out, the children feel that. My dog feels that, and to have a stable home life is really important. Now you don't have even the amount of winter rentals, and if you do, they're not affordable anymore. And if you're lucky enough to find a year-round place, it is so astronomical that most people are putting the majority of their income into just living and just having a roof over their heads, let alone feeding themselves and their children or doing anything extra. All of this to say, the island is overdue for pointed actions towards the creation of affordable and attainable housing. The Housing Bank is one amazing step in that direction. Voting at the local level, town meeting and ballot votes are extremely important. As we mentioned, the last day to register to vote is Wednesday, the 23rd. I'll add, though, creating a consistent funding source for such projects is an important step in the right direction, but it is not the only step in that direction. And one really must participate on your local planning boards, your zoning boards, your wastewater commissions and financial committees, as well as numerous other governmental positions and state level activism is imperative to moving housing initiatives forward. So I'll end saying, educate yourselves on what can be done and participate on whatever level you can to really make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. And we are going to expand upon some of the things that you just talked about with Graham and Kim when we're talking about children's development and housing instability. We're also going to amplify something else you said with Patty and Cindy coming up with this not being the only choice, but an important choice. And there are other things that need to happen as well. Right now, I would like to bring Carol Vandal on, who is a tribal elder and somebody that I would love, and we didn't do this at the beginning, and I want to do this now, Carol. This should have begun with, and I I had you on my list for coming in now, but I should have brought you up at the beginning to do, let's do a land acknowledgement right now. If you would be willing to do that. If you can I hear you? I think you're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Good evening and welcome, my relatives. I want to take a moment to breathe in the beautiful air in which we live in on our home, Noepi. And I want to ask and remember my ancestors of the Wampanoag people, the Wampanoag people, and our lands. They are our original lands for nearly 13,000 years. Can't separate us from that. And it's a very special place. I think those of you that have come here notice that and feel it. And I always contribute that special feeling to our ancestors who have lived and gone on. So in that acknowledgement, I would like you to remember that wherever you walk in this continent of Turtle Island, it was native land that has allowed us to feel the oneness. And it is native land that allows us to come together. Can I segue into what I was going to say?
Yes, I want to thank you for that, though, Carol. Thank you very much for bringing us into that space. So please, through your perspective in the island housing and the young people leaving and not being able to come back, what's happening?
Well, first I want to kataba tanau and thank you all for being here, listening and participating, and to bring 2 or 3 people, if you when you vote, bring extra people with you. We need housing on Martha's Vineyard. Personally, as an elder who retired, I was in fear that I couldn't come home, to return home to Aquinnah, because we didn't have a whole lot of housing, tribal housing included. Luckily, a house opened up. I was able to come back home to Aquinnah. Growing up there, I missed it so much. I was lucky enough then as an elder to have a small house, a 1-bedroom house. And something came up in my grandsons' lives and I had to take them in. So I was lucky once again for the tribal housing to open up, for us to bring my grandsons to live with me and to be raised with me throughout until they graduate from MVR. That's been a joy to me. And it's been a heartbreak to me as well, because I wish that my son, their father, could be close by. He can't afford to come home. When I worked 30 years in education. I could not afford to come home between the cost of living and the price of rents. I think with your support for Martha's Vineyard Housing Bank, that we will make it truly possible for some of our people to return, not only us, but people who work there and have to do the island shuffle. It's important for us to realize that everyone contributes to the economy, to the spirituality, and to our environment that we need to take care of on Martha's Vineyard. And we can't do it alone. And I want to reflect on one other thing, which is we are right now in the time that we as Native people look at as our 7th generation will rise up, and they will tell us and help us understand how we move forward through climate change, through political upheavals, and whatever we may encounter. We believe that the 7th generation is walking amongst us, and I am overjoyed with the thought of bringing our 7th generation home to be the new leaders of our tribe. And they have the vision. I've been talking to some of the youth, many tribal members, not youth, they're probably in their 20s, 30s, but they would like to come home and they would like to be active. And we are of one sound mind, that we respect the land that we walk on, and we honor these lands and our ancestors with every step and every breath we take.
Yeah. Thank you, Carol. Thank you for that. So we will revisit that too, because I know that the CCMVHB has also taken our climate and our environment into consideration when they're moving through what they would be able to accomplish if it passes. So right now I'd like to introduce Patty Moore, who is the founder of the Healthy Aging Martha's Vineyard. You have been so active, Patty, and our island is so very lucky to have someone like you who's an advocate for our elders. And you have, you and Cindy are here to represent, and you've supported the Housing Bank. And I'd love to find out why you have supported, why you've endorsed the Housing Bank.
Well, it's been our great pleasure to support and endorse and do whatever we can to make it possible for the coalition to pass in every town this transfer legislation. We believe that the solutions to housing on this island need to be island-wide, that they need to be intergenerational, that they need to take into account both resources for elders and for the younger generation that helps to support and provide services to them. For example, healthcare aides, CNAs, certified nursing assistants, don't get paid enough to really pay for, even under normal circumstances, it would be difficult for them to find year-round housing. These days, it's almost impossible. Other employees on the island are struggling, as you've heard. We'll hear more to maintain and just even to struggle daily to stay on this island. You have only to go to the to meet one of the ferries early in the morning and see the large numbers of workers coming off the ferries to see that we're already having to depend on a very large number of workers from off island. And they include not just construction workers, they include nurses. In one case I know of, at least one doctor. They include people who work for the VNA as well as for people who work for the hospital. And many of you have heard Denise Shapitzi, the hospital's CEO, speak about the crisis that she is finding simply in providing basic medical care. Last year, she tallied up the numbers of people that they have tried to entice to come to provide a stronger primary care workforce here at the hospital, as well as specialists. There were 19 people to whom she offered a contract for year-round work at the hospital who could not take the contract because they could not find affordable housing. And I'm sure that other employers can duplicate that as well. That means that those services, not only healthcare, but also emergency management and public safety services, which as elders, we are very much dependent on, but whom everybody is dependent on. Again, they are pressed hard to pay for the rental housing, much less to start. You know, just you can't find a starter house these days, but that's how most of us want to begin our gradually climbing and putting, with our families, putting some financial security in place. So I think that we have tried very hard to, and Cindy will talk a little bit later, and I may talk some more about the reasons, but one, it's island wide. Two, it has the potential not to do everything in housing, but to begin to break the logjam and do enough to generate new solutions to this old problem. And I, for one, am very grateful for the leadership that Ariel and Julie and many others on the steering committee have chosen.
Thank you.
Maybe Cindy, you could talk a little bit about how this has affected individuals in
Yes.
our
Cindy
elder
Trish
care.
is the executive director of the Healthy Aging Martha's Vineyard, and yeah, elders on this island they have a very different living picture out here, and you've been very you've shared a lot of information about this with me in the past. Can you paint a picture for us?
Oh, certainly. First of all, thank you for having us participate in this important discussion and have an opportunity to show our support for the Housing Bank. Just as a reminder, many of you may know this, but currently 1 in 3 of our full-time residents are over the age of 65. So our older adults represent a very significant percentage of our population. And this growth in our older adult has happened much faster than most had expected. This is even previous to COVID, but certainly amplified by COVID. Our data suggests, or our recent survey with all older adults across the island revealed that virtually almost every older adult, over 95%, wishes to stay on the island. They wish to age in place. This is their home. Carol mentioned so eloquently her desire to return to the island. And our older adults want to be here. They appreciate the natural assets of the island. They appreciate the way they're treated on the island, and they want to be here. And virtually of our older adult population, all wish to age in place, if that is indeed possible. Currently, about 9 out of 10 of our older adults live in a single family dwelling. And in many cases, they own that. You're more likely to own it outright as you age. 1 in 3 of our older adults lives alone, and 2 in 5 recognize currently that they have a need for home safety modifications to be able to safely age in place. Most have no interest in moving off island or even moving from their homes if possible. The triggers to do so would be to the ability to downsize to a less expensive home or a lower cost of living, as well as living closer to family members. So one of the challenges that we have for our older adults is that downsizing options virtually do not exist on the island. And we know that for most older adults, there are trigger events or eventualities at some point. There is a discussion or a consideration of downsizing one's home. And that could be as a result of children moving out, medical, financial reasons, or other reasons. And what happens is that there are really no options. One of my golf partners, who is a real estate agent, shared with me her last 3 clients were all women in their 70s whose husbands had received difficult medical diagnosis and needed to move off island in order to receive the care they needed, as well as to find affordable housing as reduction in their financial situation. So we have a challenge. How do we help our older adults stay in their homes? How do we make certain that we have the resources necessary to support this desire? So while I've just shared with you some stats. I'd love to just show you a couple of examples, let you meet some examples of older adults at different stages of their aging journey. So we can keep going down to the next, next slide. So when we think of older adults, we all have different stages and different needs. And I'd love to introduce you to Jane, who's really a composite of many of our older adults in the 60s. And what we find is the majority of our older adults between the ages of 60 and 64 continue to work and are looking to ways, live in their home and wish to stay in their home, but raise concerns about or are dealing with concerns about how they can afford to do so as they begin to transition out of working full time. So Jane's a great example. She works, owns a home in Edgartown, works off island, and her desire is to retire on the island, and it's important for her to stay in her home. She yet has been able to work out the financial considerations in order to do so. If we go and we meet Alan, who's in his 70s, we can go to the next slide. He's a great example of many of our contributing older adults who are very active as a backbone of our island in the volunteer work that they do. He and his wife have lived many years in Vineyard Haven and plan to continue to live in Vineyard Haven. He is transitioned from working full-time to part-time and is very active in a variety of volunteer ways. They've just received a difficult diagnosis for his wife, who has been diagnosed with dementia. And while they have no plans on leaving the island, they are concerned, and the stakes have been raised significantly, that they can receive the support that they will need as his wife dementia worsens. So for them to be able to stay here where they want to be, they need to make certain that the workforce and support is in place to make that a reality. As we go on to Henry, who is in his 80s, he has lived in his home in Oak Bluffs for a very long period of time. He calls his house older than me, and really is beginning to feel like it's too big for one person. In order to stay in his home, he is going to need to do some significant home safety modifications, of which he does not have the finances to do so. Again, he's contributed to our island in a variety of ways. He's a retired veteran and continues to do a great deal of volunteering on the island. And we close with Mabel, who is in her 90s and is actually finds her housing in Island Elderly Housing. And is able to live comfortably there, although continues to be very concerned about additional resource requirements for her to live and the costs and the availability of those resources. It is interesting to note that we have on average a 5-year waiting list currently for allowing our older adults to move into our elderly housing. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of a snapshot of some of the challenges that our older adults have on the island in terms of maintaining housing and finding new options for housing.
Cindy, that's really stunning to read all that. And I know that, you mentioned supports that our elders are going to need. Supports in place mean people here on the island to provide those support services. And Patty, would you like to elaborate on the need for support services for older adults?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one is a project that we've been working on for 8 years, which is a new nursing home, using a very different model, which turned out to be very successful during the pandemic. And as you all know from listening to the hospital, we are collaborating with Navigator Homes to build a new nursing home off the Edgartown Road, which will hold room for 70 patients in 5 separate units, 5 separate housing, so that every patient at the nursing home has their own room and their own bathroom. They share congregate space for eating and other activities, and a big garden and all of that. So that's at one end of the scale. The other is our attempts to get resources into keep helping people stay at home. When people get into their 80s and 90s, it's a little harder to shovel snow or rake the leaves or any of the other kinds of housing upkeep that you would think of. And so we're currently trying to develop a range of things. Cindy can talk a little bit more about some specific healthy aging programs, but we are hoping to engage volunteers of all ages in support of elders at home, because it's home and community-based services. Everybody doesn't want to live, nor can they afford to live in assisted living. The wife who has dementia that Cindy mentioned, hopefully he will be able to find smaller living quarters here while his wife is in a nursing home. But that's the kind of challenge that many elders as they get older are going to face. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. And Cindy, I want to circle back to you because I wanted to have you talk about those other things that you are doing in addition to supporting the housing bank. So I want to circle back as a little exclamation point on the discussion tonight, but I really want to move on to getting the perspective from our youth. You know, Graham Houghton, you've been here before. You were talking about the housing crisis during the first panel and the determinants of health and the social determinants of health. And, you know, so people probably know who Graham Houghton is. He's a guidance counselor at the West Tisbury School. And Kim Garrison is going to piggyback back with Graham as well. And she is the behavioral health coordinator and research specialist at the Martha's Vineyard for the Martha's Vineyard Public Schools. And so let's start with you, Graham, and talking about housing stability versus instability.
Great, thanks, Laurel. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about adverse childhood experiences and what that can do to kids and public health in general. And I couldn't help myself for tonight. I was thinking, I'm sorry I'm making a COVID analogy, but we've talked about how you can layer protections in place to reduce your risk. And things like social distancing, vaccines, quarantining, clean air, masks without filters, all that sort of thing. And I was thinking about kids, the things we could layer in place for them to set them up to be successful socially and academically. And that's sort of the angle I was taking. And it won't be a stretch. I'm just going to talk about, 4 or so real quick, and it won't be a stretch then to see in the absence of those things how unstable housing could impact a kid in school. But a stable home is a reliable environment with routines and habits and things that set kids up to be successful and let them feel safe. So if you think of reading, for example, it's often said that kids spend the first several years learning to read and then the rest of their life reading to learn. And again, like part of a healthy routine at home would be regular reading time with an adult. Also, other learning at home, whether like it's cooking and you're combining math and science and you're watching an adult prepare food and talking and asking questions, what happens if we whip this egg really quick? What's gonna, that kind of learning. And kids learn from behaviors the parents are modeling. So a parent could pay bills or read or something while a kid is doing their homework. And it's important to designate its space at home for kids to work. And I think it could be a countertop, it could be the corner of a room, but a desk is great. And you'd want the same things you have at school. You'd want good lighting, some supplies, and some space to spread out. I also think we talk a lot in school about executive function skills. And there are a lot of, I forget now, there's something like 38 executive functions or something, but like paying attention, planning, troubleshooting, controlling emotions, and delaying gratification are all examples of executive function skills that are really developed through routine from an early age. And there are games and activities that kids can play to sharpen those skills, but they are, they're learned at an early age just from modeling at home and practicing. So it's not a stretch to say, I think that success in school or failure at school can be, it starts at home. And I think, like last week, I I did a shout out to the families that overcome, adversity and develop resilience in kids. And that's often traced back to a very trusting relationship that's impactful. So I'm not, I know I'm generalizing here a little bit, but someone described a change in housing as kind of a change in a residential partnership. And I thought when you think of it that way, it is moving around makes it difficult to maintain these healthy routines and to put these 4 or 5 things in place regularly for kids. And I just think it's kind of obvious, but it puts them at a fundamental disadvantage. And I think, what I see at school with now the war in Ukraine and climate change and racial justice and civil unrest, et cetera, like the kids are under enough pressure as it is. And an unstable home does lead to anxiety. And like in simple terms, anxiety is a physiological response to danger, to perceived danger. And when you look at it in that way, it's hard to even imagine the impact that having an unstable living situation is having on kids. And you don't always see it right away, and it may not turn up until later. That's why I was talking about ACE scores and adverse childhood experiences, things like that, as a personal health and public health matter down the road. So, I guess the last thing I would say, two factors that predict social and academic success are the level of parent support and the amount of sleep kids are getting. And just having those 2 things in place are critical. If a family is moving around a lot, it can put undue pressure on the parents, which trickles down to the kids. And so when the kids lose those 2 important resources, it impacts self-esteem, increases their anxiety. And so, stable housing is going to provide more parent time, I think, and more attention from parents to set kids up to be successful. So that would be my angle for tonight, I would say.
Thank you, Graham. I mean, that really is a nice segue into behavior and development, Kim, because if your roots are that kind of insecure, that can have long-term effects, right? I mean, we're really establishing right now why housing is so important to a community and to all of us. And this is why this information is really so important to nail down and share, because when we go when we vote this coming season in our town meetings and at the ballot box, we need to go in informed with this information, knowing that we need to help and our vote matters. And Wednesday, just to let you know, is the last day you can register to vote. So make sure you let your voice be heard. So Kim, with that said, please share your wisdom here about all of this.
I think Graham stole a lot of my thunder. No, I'm just kidding. We had talked about this. And it's hard to actually disentangle all of, what Graham was talking about, ACEs, executive functioning, what it looks like in school. And I think
ACEs are, for people who don't know that,
adverse childhood experiences. Yes. And I think when we think about youth, we often think about like what are the effects and what's happening now to them. So like when they're in tumultuous living environment, and by that meaning even just moving a couple of times a year, which is not unheard of on Martha's Vineyard, that we're going to see effects immediately. But it's important to also consider the fact that there's effects of cumulative stress that happen over many years for children who are moving and don't necessarily have reliable housing. And that we know that type of stress, long-term stress, also rewires our brains, rewires how we are available to interact in relationships, how we interact really with society around us. So it's nice to talk about youth and think about like, what can we do for them now? And how does it kind of like, how can we really change the landscape for them now so that they have better environments to grow and develop in? But it's really important because we're actually investing in our society in the future. So it's really this chronological impact of stress that will just keep accumulating for youth over time. And it has effects that are just profound in every single aspect of development. But I do think it's important to think about what that might look like for a family who might move twice a year. So if you even have housing and have rental, and you have to maybe move out in the summer and move back into a new place in the winter, you're talking about at least moving twice a year. And in a typical child's school life, that's 12 years. That's 24 homes. That could potentially be 24 homes. That's 24 times that you've adjusted to making a place your consistent, reliable space. It's 24 times more that your parents have to seek out housing and be subjected to that stress. And so I just think that in thinking about what do we do now, it's not just about how do we save our youth right now, it's how do we save the future, our adults, and ensure that people are able to have healthy, productive life courses, not just that they have stable housing. So I think that's one of the things for me is it's way more nuanced even than the child who comes into our school tomorrow morning and the backpack that they wear of stress. It's, we invest a lot in academic achievement and thinking about that we're paving the way for our youth to be able to go off and choose careers and of their choice and go off to college if they so choose. But I think it's also really important for us to be thinking, how are we subjecting our youth to systems that really are rewiring who they will be as human beings in the future?
Thank you very much for that, Kim. As we are sitting here taking in all this information, there have been some people in the audience who have been wondering about why people would oppose the housing bank. And I'd love to have Ariel or Julie handle this question. If you could recap or kind of give a generalized, short little encapsulated answer to that question of some of the opposition that you have been.
Go ahead.
No, receiving. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there are lots of different reasons that people have come up with. Overdevelopment might be one of them. But the housing bank legislation requires a minimum of 75% of funds to be committed to previously developed land. The remainder of 25% is subjected to stringent environmental requirements. And that will result in little new development, and there won't be overdevelopment with those requirements in place. But what I would also say, we have a spot on the ccmvhb.org website that is right on our front pages, and it's called Misconceptions. And it will give you lots of ideas that people might have and answers to those misconceptions that we've worked out in our processes. So
thank you, Ariel. And you also have a frequently asked questions section
Yep.
on the website too. And Jess, I see that we have another question already. So will first-time home buyers receive an exemption from the housing bank fee? Julie, do you have an answer for that? You're still muted. You're muted.
I'm sorry, I didn't see the question.
So will first-time home buyers receive an exemption from the housing bank fee? So if you're a first-time home buyer,
Ariel,
do you have an answer to that?
well, the first $1 million is exempt from the transfer fee.
But if
So,
you're a first-time home buyer, if this is the first time you're buying a home, are you exempt from the fee or no?
well, that is not baked into the legislation. we covered certain policy issues as we crafted the legislation with the lawyers last summer. And then we worked with the lawyers on island and the select boards on island. So that, along with a number of other issues, are things that will be left to the elected commissioners once they come to, once the housing bank is formed. And a number of policy issues such as that will be resolved by them.
Okay.
You can't really cover every detail when you're writing the legislation as it is what, 20 pages long at this point. And so you really can't cover all of it in that one document. And there are a number of things that will be left to the commissioners once they're elected.
Which brings point, which also hones in on the fact that the CCMVHB, the people that are the coalition to create this housing bank, once the housing bank passes, a whole new group of people come in to make those decisions. It's a completely different group, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
But I just heard from a colleague on the coalition saying that that has not been approved, the exemption for first-time home buyers. But the fact that the first $1 million of any home sale is exempt, I think is something that gets at the same issue.
Okay. Yeah. Great. So yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, so it's basically, it's no, but it's if the first $1 million is exempt and anything over $1 million, that will be 2% of that would go to the housing bank, subject to the housing bank. Okay, great.
And that's at least $1 million, because the towns can decide to have it be more also.
So that's another thing to bring up is that, and you can go to ccmvhb.org, where again, they have a frequently asked questions section and a misconception section. You can get so much information there to fill you up if you're not getting your answers here tonight. That will answer a ton of questions. And again, if you have any other questions, you can email me, Laurel@mvyradio.org. It's in the chat. Jess put it there, and I'll make sure you get to the right person to get these questions answered. Or you can email info@ccmvhb.org. So it's really important right now. If you have questions, keep them coming. We've got another 7 or 8 minutes here to make sure we get your questions answered. We have an opportunity because we have the experts here to talk about these things. And I want to, as we're kind of coming to the end of the hour, circle back to you, Cindy. We were talking about, we've really gotten a lot of information about why we need housing, more housing out here. It's may seem obvious when you hear it, but I think that we need to hear it. We need to hear the actual statistics and the fact that this island can change and has been changing because of our housing crisis. And going back to the elders, Cindy, you and Patty were saying last week when we were talking that the housing bank is one piece of the puzzle, very important. Ariel, you said this earlier. It's one important piece of the puzzle in one tool. What are some other things that you as an organization are doing?
Well, I'll be happy to answer that, but would like to just acknowledge the catalyst aspect of the housing bank. So these, I think Ariel mentioned these, this has been an issue that's been overdue to deal with, and it requires all of us to work together differently and to think about solutions in a different way. So something like the housing bank, and that's threatening to people, back to why people wouldn't want to vote for it. We're thinking about it in creative ways. We're thinking about it in trying to be equitable and creating opportunities for those who don't have them currently with housing. So it's an amazing way to take this issue on and to gain an island-wide perspective on it. Obviously, each town is addressing affordable issues. We've got the Island Housing Trust, many different approaches toward addressing our housing crisis, which it is a crisis, and it's impacting everyone, not just our older adults. At Healthy Aging, not only do we support all of these initiatives that others are doing, we are trying to focus on some of the shorter term ways that we can create impact. For example, working with our Falls Prevention Coalition, we've been able to get the Home Safety Modification Program off the ground, which has been funded by local funders, including the hospital, the savings bank. That allows us to come into older adults' house, homes and put in the safety modifications that create an environment where they can age in place. We are also in the very early stages of exploring home sharing, which is a program that's worked nationally in many different communities, where you match up an older adult. I mentioned 1 in 3 of our older adults lives alone, with someone in the workforce at a reduced rent, and creates an agreement between those two individuals where they're able to access housing in exchange for what's important to the older adults. So those are kind of 2 examples of where we're trying to just really address some of the shorter term barriers to creating the housing solutions that we need.
Thank you, Cindy. Julie.
Yeah, Laura, I just wanted to add a couple of other points that I think are interesting with respect to the way the housing bank has been envisioned. One is that we'll be able to help people who are at 240% of area median income, AMI. Currently, the affordable housing programs that exist on the island are subject to much more strict AMI qualifications. And people who are counselors at community services, or teachers at the high school, or folks who work in the ER have incomes well above the federal levels available for assistance through the federal programs that exist currently on the island. So one of the unique things about the housing bank is that we will be able to serve folks with incomes well above that, people who are part of the infrastructure of the island, for both year-round rentals, but also ownership opportunities. Those are both important. And a second piece to it, it's a little bit that Ariel was getting at a little while ago, proceeds from the transfer fee, those in the housing bank, the enabling legislation allows for those funds to be used for housing infrastructure. So for example, if there's a development project going on with housing bank funds, wastewater situations that need to be addressed can be funded through, related to that project, can be funded through the transfer fee revenues that will be collected. So those are 2, I think, aspects of the project that I think are very helpful and a little more broadly interpreted.
Thank you for that, Julie. I really appreciate that. Before I start to wrap things up here, is there any other information that any of our panelists would like to share? Anything?
I would just,
yes.
sorry, I would really like to reiterate participation on your local town committees. I know that we are having a really hard time finding people that have the time and the ability to volunteer for these positions. I could definitely see how having no housing on the island is part of that too. You know, a lot of people on boards are retiring and wanting to move, you know, to different stages in their lives. And we need people to step up, definitely some more younger people. If you can involve yourself in, you know, your local town committees, we need to hear your voices. We don't get to address the issues that are important to you unless that you show up and you start to contribute to those. Also, I will say, as it is in the chat, Doug, lovely Doug pointed out, go and vote, and twice.
Yeah,
because you can this time.
Town meeting and at the ballot box,
at town
right?
meeting and at the ballot box. And a lot of those dates are separate dates. So please, you know, look at either our website at ccmvhb.org or on your local town site, and it will let you know where you need to be and when. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. So I'm Laurel Reddington for listener-supported nonprofit radio, MVY Radio. And I want to thank you for being here tonight. We have a big decision to make for the future of our island. And it's really important for us to all go in informed. And I hope that tonight as Katie in the chat said, pulled back another layer of understanding for you, so that Wednesday, first and foremost, make sure you're registered to vote. That's the last day to register to vote. And again, you'd be surprised at how many people are not registered and don't go to the polls. And your voice is needed now more than ever. So make sure it's heard. And we will have another panel next Monday night. We'll talk about where we go from here, and we'll talk about other aspects of the housing bank as well. I hope you can show up and participate and ask your questions, no matter what perspective they're coming from. It's really important that we are together moving this community forward. We've heard from such important perspectives on this island of what's happening to the island and how much it's changed and how much it might change too, and really affect a lot of our livelihoods and our health and our development and across the board. So thank you for being here with us tonight. Any questions, feel free to email me, contact anybody, one of these wonderful, brilliant panelists here tonight, and we will hopefully see you here next week. If you want to see them, this is the last thing I'll say. We have recorded these, so these will be all up on our community outreach page. You can go and review them again or spread the word and have your friends go and watch them after this is over as well. So thank you so much, everybody on this panel, for sharing your wisdom, and have a beautiful night.
Thank you, Laurel.
Thank you very much.